So we're going to start off today with a panel discussion about FOIA and PIA records. Increasingly, journalists are having more difficulty breaking through the indifference of public officials, at best, or outright animosity to get the public records information that's so critical to reporting. So we'll hear from experts in Maryland, Delaware, and DC on how to break through. And our moderator for the panel today is Cheryl Thompson of the Washington Post. So Cheryl not only is at the Post, but she's an associate professor of journalism at George Washington University, and she writes investigative stories for the Post. She came to the Post in 1997 and has written extensively about law enforcement, political corruption, and guns, including an investigative series on firearms that tracked guns used to kill more than 500 police officers in the U.S. In 2015, her reporting revealed nearly 40 witnesses to crime in the D.C. area were killed for talking to authorities or out of fear that they might. And her national investigation later that year found that nearly one person a week died after being tasered by police. So that story was part of the newspaper's year-long series on police shootings, a series that won the 2016 Pulitzer Prize for National Reporting. So her latest project, published in May, examined the unsolved murders of 6 little black girls nearly half a century ago in DC. Earlier this year, she was elected the first African-American president of the Investigative Reporters and Editors, and was named Journalism Educator of the Year in 2017 by the National Association of Black Journalists. Cheryl has also won an Emmy and other national awards and was part of the team that won the 2002 Pulitzer for National Reporting for the 9/11 terrorist attacks. So we are delighted to have Cheryl with us. She's going to come on down. We'll mic her up, and our panelists, whom she will introduce, will be at our table. So panelists, if you want to go to your places, and we'll get started.
Thank you, Rebecca. The last time somebody told me to come on down, I was really actually on The Price is Right. And I won. It was many years ago.
Do we have to sign seats?
So thank you guys for having us this morning. Thanks for joining us in what I hope will be a invigorating, lively discussion on how to work with public records and government transparency. Everybody needs to do a better job of that. As a professor of journalism, I make my students, it's a requirement, they have to file a FOIA, actually file it, and wait for the results, which usually takes longer than a semester. So we're hoping that Lisa Kirshner can cut through some of that red tape for us and tell us how we can do a better job, or how they can do a better job. So I want to introduce the panelists this morning. I'm joined today by Lisa Kirshner, who 2 years ago, I believe it was, became Maryland's first ever, I love this title, Public Access Ombudsman. Now, if y'all can tell me what that means, she can. This will be real good, because I can't wait to hear from her. Then there's Rick Bloom. Good morning, Rick. Who's Director of News Media for Open Government, and John Flaherty, President or Director of the Government Coalition for Open Government. So, Rick, I'd like to start with you, give you your say here. The two key ways that journalists obtain information are through public records requests and using unnamed sources. I know as a working journalist that getting public records has always been challenging, always, and it's worse in this political environment. I'm going back and forth now with a DC agency over public records, and every single week I have to call this FOIA officer and say, where are my records? And finally I got so frustrated, I said, why do I have to continue to call you every week when you know that you have records that are due us? I said, you're not acting in good faith. And then of course, I got the records. But it's still, every week they trickle out, and so we need to do something about that. Prime records that the public has a right to have and to know about is even more difficult. So, Rick, talk about, if you will, the pros and cons of getting public records and the roadblocks and the problems that journalists face.
Sure, and thank you to Morgan State and to you and to the Maryland, and let's see, I gotta make sure I get the name right, Maryland, Delaware, DC Press Association. The pros and cons, there's not a lot of cons other than it takes a lot of time. The pros are you can get a lot of really useful information. I think it's really useful to use people like the Public Access Ombudsman. There's many of them in the states. Doesn't matter what state you are, they may have one. The federal government now has one. It's called the Office of Government Information Services. It's a bland name. It exists within the National Archives. The idea is you go to an agency, you make a request, you get nowhere, you don't get a response, or you get a response that you're not happy with. You have to be ready to yell at the phone. Maybe they don't quickly, respond to you. There's a place you can go where you can say, hey, look, I'm not getting a fair shake. And depending on it, if your state has one, they can help pry those records loose. They can bring the agency to the table. It can be very effective and helpful. And I'm sure Maryland has a great, very effective program. I think the advantage of using public records laws along with sources is that you can double team. You can do a little research. You can use the public records laws, be very clear and specific about what you're looking for. And that's useful in helping to get your records faster. You have to be cautious though, because you don't want to be so specific that you reveal a source and you burn a source. A news outlet called The Intercept obtained a record about surveillance and the guidance on when the government could surveil certain communities. And they put in a FOIA request, a federal FOIA request, and they used the title of the document. And they said, we want that document. And the issue was that they wanted the government to go through the redaction process to, black out the names of people that, whose names shouldn't be released, so that they got a quote unquote clean document. Unfortunately, since they'd included the title, if you believe the government's account of this, they included the title, so that allowed the government to do a leak investigation. And then they identified Terry Albury, who was I think it was an FBI agent in Minnesota, and he was sentenced to, I think it was 5 years last week for leaking information and being a source to a news outlet.
Can I?
Please do.
So how are you specific, right? And I mean, because what are the chances that the government's gonna, well, maybe now they do, the federal government will go back and figure out who leaked something? I mean, so in other words, was there another way for the journalist to ask for the document as to not identify the person who had it?
I don't think that there's a blanket answer to that. I think you have to do a little reporting and get the context. If you have an adversarial relationship and you're trying to get this in an adversarial kind of investigation, you do want to be a little careful about your sources. If you're just, if you have a friendly source who says, look for this, maybe they can help you. I just think you have to understand the context and be careful about it. So I don't have the solution. You can always call the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, where I work. We provide advice and guidance on making requests in states. We have several lawyers who know what they're doing. I'm more of a policy guy, but down the hall from me are people who can provide a lot of advice on your specific situation. And they will bring cases too, if you want to sue. So.
Oh, no, go ahead and finish your thought. I just had a thought I didn't want to interrupt you. that was something that sort of, I've wondered about.
Right.
I've never heard of that. I mean, how does the Intercept feel about what happened?
You would talk to them. There's some dispute about whether their request actually was what led to the source. In another case, and I'm sorry, I'm dealing with national security. Reality Winner is a government contractor in Georgia, and at the time, there's a lot of news reporting about Russian meddling, and certain political leaders were doubting whether there was Russian meddling in the election. And
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I know.
Russian meddling in elections?
Apparently, it's happening.
I got to get caught up on the news.
Yeah, we should all check our phones right now and see what's going on. But so she had a document that she provided anonymously, and the news outlet had the document and showed it to government sources to say, look, we're going to report this. Can you tell us, specifically about you're concerned about any, any investigatory information that might, reveal a source or a method or anything? Is there anything sensitive here that we should not report? And the government used the document as part of that conversation, and they found that there were folds in the document, in the copy of the document they sell. So they said, okay, somebody had physical access to this. So they were able to identify, I think it was 6 individuals who had access, and they identified who had printed the document. And then they identified from the 6, one person had contacted a news outlet, which happened to be the same news outlet that had the story, and that allowed the government to identify a reality winner within several days. So you do have to be careful. 10, 15 years ago, investigations to identify sources kind of went nowhere. It was very hard to do a leak investigation. Today they go places and they identify people, and the government is doing far more leak investigations now than they did in the past. And even when you're dealing with non-national security kind of issues, it's harder to get to sources. It's harder to get information. So you have to be very creative. So we can get into that.
Why is it easier to do leak investigations now? Is it easier, or is it that the government cares more now than it did 10, 15 years ago?
It actually, you're right. It's in your question. It is more the latter. I had thought that with the advent of kind of big data and the ability to track more and to follow the blue dot on the map, that you could find out who was at a park sitting on a bench for 5 minutes with somebody else who was sitting at a park on a bench for 5 minutes. But the reality is we have my colleague Gabe Rotman at the Reporters Committee has done a lot of work cataloging leak investigations, and just released this. If you go to the Reporters Committee website, you'll see a whole catalog of all the leak investigations. We keep adding more because we keep discovering more, or he does at least. And the reality is, I think what he's concluding is that the political will is there to find the sources. And I find that troubling. I find that objectionable. I think that when you're trying to report and you're trying to get information out to the public, you have to put up with a little bit of confidential, unnamed sources when you're in government.
So the political will may be there to find the leaks, but do they really think that's going to stop a good reporter, or they think it's going to plug the leaks, if you will, in an agency? I mean, do they really believe that? Does the government believe that?
I personally, I don't think so. I think they're just trying to delay and put off the story, and they're trying to delay the reporting as long as possible. I think when companies have trade secrets, or if they don't have trade secrets but they're bringing trade secrecy claims and they're suing the government to prevent them from disclosing things to you, I think they're just trying to delay the story. We're dealing with a farm bill. Every 5 years, Congress passes a farm bill, and every 5 years we find a FOIA exemption in the farm bill. And this one has to do with the Argus Leader in South Dakota 7 years ago requested the amount that retailers receive every year through the Supplemental Nutrition Program, the SNAP program. Just a dollar amount that every retailer receives. The food industry has fought that for 7 years. It's now going up to the Supreme Court about whether you can see how much Amazon or your local convenience store receives through the SNAP program. That's outrageous. So they've also gone to Congress and to get a FOIA exemption to solve the problem. And the courts have repeatedly said there's no trade secret, there's no commercial interest in this. This should be public. So we're trying to help on that front. So we'll see.
So what's the argument? Sorry.
What's the argument from the other side? The arguments that they've put out are that this would provide competitive harm. They've made that case in court, and they've repeatedly lost. That there is no competitive harm. Politically, we've heard that they're raising concerns that this might reveal personal privacy information And then it's people who don't understand the issue and the specifics of what's requested. They say, oh, well, we don't want to, out people who are receiving SNAP benefits. But that's totally not the issue here. But of course, you don't have to have facts in order to win the political argument, unfortunately. So we're trying to counter that. I don't think that there's a lot of merit to the arguments to keep the information secret. I mean, if you look at Amazon a couple weeks ago, they just decided that they were going to pay their employees more, and that was a direct result of reporting about Amazon wages and retailers' wages based on a subset of this data. So it's important. So I don't think that there's I think that they are really just trying to delay the public getting information.
Okay. And I'll come back because I have another question for you, and
Sure.
I'll come back to you. So, Lisa,
Yes, ma'am.
Lisa, you are my target this morning. You're the person that I deal with most often. Your position, well, actually not your position, because there aren't many people who have a position like you have. Maryland created this position. Why? Why did they create this public access ombudsman? It sounds really good. Do you really speed up FOIA requests? You can tell me. It's just between us.
So what I say in this room stays in this room, okay? I'm saying this to a room full of reporters. But I do want to speak candidly, because in my position, I am a neutral. I function as a neutral, as between a responding agency and a requester. About 20% of my customers are from members of the press or media who are making occupational and professional use of Maryland's record law, known as the Public Information Act. It's our counterpart to FOIA. As far as why Maryland created my office, a really good person to ask is actually Rebecca Snyder. And some of the other open governments in Maryland, advocates in Maryland. I was not involved in the lobbying to get the legislation. It took an act of the General Assembly to create my office and the signature of the governor on the enacted bill. And it came about because there were some very passionate advocates who wanted practical, accessible, problem-solving tools to help make Maryland's record law work better. Maryland is now maybe one of, I want to say, somewhere between 12 and 16 states in the country that have an office that functions along my lines. There are variations amongst all of us according to the particulars of the state law involved, but the general principle is this: we work on a volunteer. We work with our requesters and our agencies on a strictly voluntary basis. We are not records police. We don't. I, for example, have no enforcement authority. I cannot go in and command an agency to turn over the records to me and let me look at them so I can determine if an exemption applies. Or I can't go to an agency and say, well, why don't you have that record? Your record retention laws command it. And I can't go to requesters and say, this is the 12th request this week. Do you think, we can work on coming up maybe with one request or just a couple that would do it for you instead of going back on a daily basis? I can't make anyone do anything. I really am dependent on the goodwill and the good intentions of the people involved. Like all things, it gets easier and better with experience. So as I have gotten to know, I'm just curious, have any in this room had occasion to use my office in the past? Well, I know Brian. Brian is a good customer of mine. Anyone else? So I'm assuming that means, at least as far as Maryland record requests go, that none of you are having any problems. It's all smooth sailing. You're getting everything you asked for, right?
Not smooth sailing so much.
Okay.
So, several years ago, in actually 2006, you can say, so you can plead the fifth, you weren't there then.
Okay.
I was investigating Jack Johnson. been 3 years of my life investigating Jack Johnson. And so I had to file FOIAs with the county, with Prince George's County. And initially it was somewhat easy because I went through sources to get documents, but then as he and his administration saw the stories coming out, they made my life a little more difficult, as you guys would imagine. And so then I started filing FOIAs, and they started charging these outrageous amounts of money. And now, and I really sort of balked at the Post paying for it, even though the Post could afford it. But what about smaller publications and smaller organizations that can't afford to pay? And I was looking for like contracts and credit card receipts and travel records and those kinds of things that typically I'm not charged for in DC. And I covered the DC Police Department for years, and they never charged me. I don't think DC ever charged me. I probably shouldn't say that because now they'll start charging. But clearly I thought it was the county's way to sort of scare off me, which anybody who knows me, that ain't happening, and scare off other media. And so how do you decide, if you do, what are you, your office, and the people who run the state doing to level the playing field in terms of reasonable fees?
Fee issues, I'll tell you, are hard for a number of reasons. I'll come back to it. But and I'd be very interested to hear from some of the audience members what your experience is. But in Maryland, my perception is that members of the press are getting more consideration of their fee waiver requests than are other requesters. I have heard, this is purely anecdotal, wouldn't count as a verifiable source for you all, but I've heard that Governor Hogan, for example, has instructed the executive agencies that members of the press are not to be charged fees for record requests, are not to be charged fees.
That's a nice little pre-election ploy.
That's right. Is that a savvy move or what? But, you know, as members of the press, you all have a lot of power. If you don't get your fee waiver granted, or if you get charged an excessive amount of fees, it is true you have a potential remedy in the Compliance Board. This is another office that was created by the legislature at the same time they created my function. But the Compliance Board can only deal with fee issues that are over $350. They can review them to determine if they're in compliance with law, and they actually rule on them. They issue public opinions, and they're enforceable in a court. So if you feel you're being charged improperly, or it's just being, it's just being thrown at you to deter you, you can raise that with the Compliance Board. You can also raise it with my office. And I can try to negotiate it down. But my general perception in Maryland is that members of the press are getting, at least from state agencies, you're getting consideration. Anytime you ask for a fee waiver, it will be considered. And I would urge you to take seriously the power of the pen. As Dean Wickham was alluding to, you know, the pen is a mighty powerful instrument. You have a means to publicize decisions that you think are contrary to public policy or that are newsworthy.
How much, though, does that slow the process? I mean, that's, it's like they create this sort of bureaucracy, and it's like, okay, so I don't like the fees, so then I come to your office. Okay, well, the clock is ticking because we have deadlines. You don't want to get scooped, and in this 24-hour news cycle, every minute counts.
Right.
So how much does, going through these layers, I mean, if that's the case, we might as well go through the courts. That's why we don't go through the courts, because it takes so much time. So, how much does coming to you stop the clock?
One of the nice things about my office is that I have just a very general mandate to make reasonable efforts to resolve disputes. And one of the things I try to do in my role is to, when something is very time sensitive, I try to bump it up. I have never met a reporter who did not have a matter that didn't need to be resolved 2 weeks ago, or that isn't the subject of a deadline. My deadline is tonight. My deadline is tomorrow. Once the election happens, it's no longer newsworthy. I need to get this out now. So, I will tell this group that in my discretion as ombudsman, I will frequently take media and press requests and other requests that are, for whatever reason, are very time sensitive, and I will move them up. Now, that doesn't guarantee you're going to get, one, it doesn't guarantee you're going to get a satisfactory resolution, and B, it doesn't mean that I'm going to get a similar reception at the agency level, but I will try. In Maryland, this can vary state to state, and it will certainly vary as compared to the Fed, but I do think throughout a good part of Maryland, there's a very healthy respect for and appreciation of the press, and that many agencies will sincerely try to meet real deadlines. So at least I find that it's easier for me often to get an ear on behalf of the press than sometimes for other requesters.
Can you make it clear because there's students here who may not know the law, the public records law, like, so the 30 days, is it 30 days in Maryland? 30 working days or 30 calendar days?
Okay. There are a number of deadlines under Maryland's law, but the 30-day deadline that you're referring to is kind of the general rule. It is the outside deadline by which agencies should respond in full to a request.
Now, can you
Yes.
also make
And it's 30
clear-
calendar days.
30 calendar days.
Yes.
Can you also make clear to students that that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to turn over the records in 30 days, that you're just going to respond in 30 days?
Well-
I'm the wrong girl up here today, moderator. Okay, I'm letting out all
you're the right
my FOIA
person. You're the right
frustrations on this. But is that correct?
This is an area where there is a gap, a real gap between what the law says should happen and what happens. I mean, we'll be honest, there are real differences. So when we talk about improvement, we want to talk about actual improvement, not just about writing it in a nice, in a more flowery way or more elevated language. But the law says in Maryland that agencies should produce records, those that are disclosable, as promptly as practicable. It says, when records are readily available, they shall be produced immediately. 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 I don't know if anyone here has ever requested a record from an agency and had it produced to them immediately. Brian has.
I have to actually,
Excellent.
because I told them, they said, oh, it'll take time to copy. It was in Maryland, Prince George's County. I said, that's okay, because we had a portable copier at the Post. I said, I'll bring my own copier. So we took the copier over, and
Right. So
But that's-
sometimes if a record is sitting on an agency's website, for example, they can turn it over immediately. But the point here is not that we want to ding agencies that aren't responding literally immediately, but that the law recognizes the time value of actual production and directs agencies that they should be responding as promptly as practicable. In Maryland, a very common complaint is, well, I heard nothing until day 29, and then what I got on day 29 was a letter that they weren't going to be able to get to this for a while. Or I wasn't going to get the records at all. Or I could have the records, but it was going to cost, $15,000. I'm just pulling that number out of thin air. So you can, in all those examples, the law is not working as intended. I will often, I get many complaints about timeliness issues, and what I always say to requesters is that shouldn't have happened, but I can't turn the clock back. No one at that agency can turn the clock back. A judge could not turn the clock back. So let's talk about what else can be done that would be helpful. So it would be helpful if we can get an actual response now. That would be helpful. Sometimes we can work on waiving any fees. Sometimes, if it's a systemic problem, we can try to clear the channels so that the agency creates a new path that works better or works better. So all of these things are, they take time. They take, in some instances, I'm finding a lot of relationship building. But once you make a little progress in that direction, what I find is it works better for everybody, so they're happy. Agencies are happy not to have people pounding on the door and writing nasty stories, about how long it took them to produce. And then the reporters are happy because they get their records and they get their information. So I think it is well worth that effort.
You make me want to file a Maryland FOIA just so that I can see you cut my fees, release the records immediately. I'm going to have to find a Maryland story just so that, I get a chance to work with you on this and see how we can get this.
Well, I hope you do, Cheryl. I have to say, when you were introduced and they mentioned your newest project, I think I have heard of that project through my work as an ombudsman. I'm subject to mandatory confidentiality, so I can't go into more detail, but I think it is a very interesting project and story, to say the least.
Thank you.
Can I just mention one
Yes,
other?
absolutely.
Another plug, it's a blatant plug for my office. Rick was talking about the problem about needing to keep sources confidential, but yet needing sometimes to be able to prod the agency. I have had matters in which reporters came to me and said, because everything that's said to me is in confidence, I cannot reveal it without express permission. So they say, I want this document. I know they have this document, I know where it is, but I can't tell them that. And so we go in small steps, and I frequently will, in those circumstances, end up working with the agency's lawyer. And we approach it, however, directly or indirectly the lawyer is willing to. But for example, in the most recent matter I've had along those lines, we did get the document. And the lawyer, I was given permission to disclose to the lawyer where exactly they should look for the document. And sure enough, it was there.
Oh, that's terrific. Thanks. And I'll come back to both of you. John, for the last, 16 years, I think, you fought to obtain public documents from two of Delaware's governors. They must really love you in that state. You're probably as high-ranking on the list of people to love as I am. First in 2002, when Ruth Ann Minner she ran the state. And then the last couple of years under the current governor, John Carney. What has that been like for you? 16 years, that's a long time.
It is a long time. First of all, I'm going to thank Rebecca Snyder for putting this forum on. And we have one of the best reporters in Delaware in the front row here, Christina Jedra, who has covered a lot of stuff, and a lot of politicians fear her, so she must be doing a good job. And I want to thank Morgan State University for hosting this conference. I don't wish you well on November 10th when you play Delaware State University, the Hornets, so good luck with that game.
Not so much on the, I wouldn't, you're not on your home turf right now, John.
I know. Well, I was a former president of the Delaware Coalition for Open Government and also lobbyist for a group called Common Cause. I want to talk about two things. Both of them have to do with a governor in 2002 and a governor now. Both of them have to do with, in my opinion, they just completely sold out the public interest for the special interest. The first case had to do with a refinery. Back in March of 2001, 14 refineries in 9 states were ordered to clean up their refineries in many states. In the state of Delaware, we had one at a city called Delaware City. At the time, it was called Motiva. And they weren't poor. I mean, they were partly owned by Royal Dutch Shell and also a Saudi Arabian group. But they were mandated by this consent decree to install advanced scrubbers in their chimneys to capture the pollution so that they wouldn't pollute the air, and they also had requirements to clean up the water. Well, over the next year and a half, next year and 9 months, this refinery lobbied the governor to abrogate that consent decree. They wanted to save. They were going to maintain the air pollution portion, but not the water pollution. They were going to take the pollution from the chimneys and dump it in the Delaware River. That refinery is right on the river. They dump all kinds of, we're talking like 200 million pounds a year of pollutants were going to be dumped in Delaware River, in addition to what they do now. They dump in their mercury, grease, God knows what else. They take in 400 million gallons of water a day for free for cooling operations, and that comes out, and people wonder why there isn't any more fish around. Well, a group of us noticed in December of 2002, about a year and 3 quarters after that, that the state of Delaware was advertising for a new a new pollution abatement equipment at this refinery. And we said, well, what happened to the old agreement that we had from March of 2001? And we were getting all kinds of shuffles about this and that. And so what we finally decided to do was that we filed 7 Freedom of Information Act requests. Figured that one of them was going to hit. We filed one with Governor Ruth Ann Minner. She was the one who was meeting with these private officials. The Delaware Department of Natural Resources, they're in charge of the environmental laws in Delaware. We also filed a FOIA request with the Department of Justice in DC and Department of Justice in the regional office in Philadelphia, as well as EPA's office in Washington, EPA's office in Philadelphia, and also with a group called the federal agency called the Delaware River Basin Commission. So we filed these FOIA requests. We kind of figured that the governor was cutting some kind of deal behind our back, but we wanted to get some kind of documentation to show that. Well, much to our surprise, we had requested from the governor the right to inspect the project file. And the attorney, the lead attorney for Governor Ruth Ann Minner in 2002 was a guy named Matt Den, who is now Delaware's Attorney General. And I was flabbergasted then, I'm still flabbergasted now. He said, come on up to our office, take a look at the file. And we did. We went up to the 12th floor of the Carvel building. We had all these papers, about 8 of us there, and everybody's going here, there, and everywhere. And we found what we were looking for. We found documentation that the governor of the state of Delaware, Ruth Ann Minner, was meeting with Motiva at Motiva's insistence. They had a plan to come up to do away with what they were legally required to do in 2001 and do something cheap and easy in 2002. So they were trying to go full bore ahead in December of 2002 and get this minimal pollution abatement equipment installed. So we filed these requests, and we went up to the governor's office and we're looking at the file, and we found about the governor meeting, and all these private interests were meeting with the governor to try to get these requirements lessened. One particular email stands out was the head regulator in Delaware. Delaware has an air and waste department in the Delaware Department of Natural Resources. And we found an email that he had sent to this refinery. He wanted the refinery to supply him with free baseball hats and T-shirts. Now, this refinery is one of the most polluting refineries in the entire country. It was bad news. They took all this high sulfur, cheap oil from Venezuela to process there in Delaware City. So the email was from the head regulator, John Blevins, to the refinery, basically macing them, telling them, I want these free things for a DNREC. DNREC is for a DNREC award ceremony. And I'm not sure which is worse, having the chief polluter be the awarding of gifts for people doing good at these award ceremonies. This was the chief polluter in the state, or the chief regulator demanding free stuff from a regulated company. That guy, he lasted about another month or two, and he got transferred down to Texas doing something else. So after we inspected the file on this refinery, we then went to the Delaware General Assembly, and we went, and of course we notified the press. We had a lot of press on this. The Delaware General Assembly got on board. They passed a resolution urging the governor not to abrogate the consent agreement in March of 2001. And we also met with our Delaware congressional delegation. But we really weren't sure going into 2003 what was going to happen. So we figured, well, we better go down to Capitol Hill. We better talk to Corzine, Lautenberg, and Andrews, the New Jersey people, because if Governor Minner's plan works out, all that stuff from the chimney is going to be dumped in the river. It's going to flow over to New Jersey. So at the time, Senator Corzine was in office, and Lautenberg was there, and we met with Corzine personally and Lautenberg staff in Andrews' office. And those guys were just horrified about the prospect of this agreement resulting in this pollution just being dumped in the river. We were lucky because the EPA administrator at the time was from New Jersey, Christy Whitman. And she basically told Minner, you better get back in line and you better do what you promised to do in 2001. And so by end of February, early March of 2003, the governor said, all right, I surrender, and they decided to install the what they call scrubbers in the chimneys, and they're going to recycle the pollutants they recover from the chimneys. So in many cases, I mean, there was nothing in FOIA that would exempt the governor from sharing these documents with us other than political embarrassment. She was cutting a deal to save this refinery $70 million. She probably got X amount of campaign contributions, who knows. But we were successful, very successful in that one.
You raised two good issues, John. One is, remember he said that someone invited him up to inspect the records. Always ask to inspect the records, right? Because sometimes you can do that easier and quicker than getting copies. So that's one way. And the other thing you mentioned was you didn't think there was anything in the law that exempted. When people turn you down for records, make them cite the specific statute that allows them to keep the records private. And sometimes they can't do it, and then they just give you the records. So you raised two really valid points.
Right,
Go
now
ahead,
They're
John.
supposed to.
The second point, and the governor Minner could easily have triggered executive privilege. That's an all-encompassing deal to hide anything they want to do. But her attorney, he was a stand-up guy. He's now Delaware's Attorney General. I'm not really happy with a lot of his rulings coming down, particularly on the next example. But the next example has to do with buses. We have a transit hub in downtown Wilmington, and it's excellent. It has a square where buses can stop on each one of the four sides, and there were two other elongated streets. And it became a formal bus hub in 1992 by Republican Governor Mike Castle. And since 1992, ridership, at least in Delaware, has just went through the roof. And a lot of the businesses in downtown weren't too happy with this. They didn't like buses. They don't like people that ride buses. Our governor has said, John Carney has said publicly, that one of the reasons we have crime in the city of Wilmington, the big city, is because of the bus riders. We had an incident at Rodney Square where a young man was murdered. He was a bus rider. He was not a perpetrator. He came to the defense of this woman who was, she had her baby in a cart, and she was being followed by a deranged individual. He followed her up to Rodney Square. This young man came to her defense, and he was stabbed and he bled to death in Rodney Square. But our governor says that bus riders are the reasons why we have crime in Rodney Square, and it's a lot of baloney. The commercial people around this bus hub say that the bus riders are responsible for the vacancies of the high vacancy rate that Delaware has in their commercial market. The bus riders are blamed for the congestion, and there is a lot of buses at this square, but it was by design. The state transit agency had a system called Pulse where they would stop, and it got a little bulky, and we suggested why not have stop and go. Well, back, we didn't know it at the time, but from August till September of 2017, our governor led an effort, a secret effort, having to get state public officials working with private special interests in coming up with a plan to dismantle this transit hub. We had about 1,300 buses a day that would come to this square. You get off, you walk around the side, you get on your connecting bus, and off you go. Well, we have a new big shot in town, new sheriff called Comores. They wanted the buses off of Rodney Square. So they put pressure on the governor. And I don't blame Comores, or I don't blame Bacini Pollen, or I don't blame Bank of America. All these guys showed up in these emails that I got later on. I blame the public officials that gave in to this. They should never have done that. They could have worked with those companies to accommodate their interests, but they didn't do that. So they came up with this secret plan from April until September of 2017. Now, we didn't know what was even going on at the time because there was a public hearing at the end of September of 2017 to have the public come in and just talk about bus service. But after the results of that hearing was concluded, the governor announced, and why the governor is involved in this is, how many governors get involved in moving buses in bus stops? It's absolutely absurd, but he did that.
Well, the question is, why is he involved? Have you looked?
He's wily. He was involved because he was told by the company Chemours that we have a big Hotel DuPont building where the DuPont company moved out to the suburbs. Chemours was spun off from the DuPont company, and the deal was they were going to put $200 million in. Chemours was going to have this Buccini Pollen Group in Wilmington put $200 million in what they call a grand bargain to have their headquarters in Wilmington if they get rid of the buses. So that was the deal. You get rid of the buses, you get rid of the people at the square, we'll invest $200 million. Now, they could easily have worked with this company. They could easily have showed them the advantages of having a headquarters in downtown Wilmington, but they didn't do that. So on December 16th, we had 1,250 buses coming by this square. The next day it was down to about 200. Nobody knew where to go. You had to go 6, 7, 8 blocks to get your connecting bus if you even knew where to go for that. So we kind of had an idea what was going on, but we filed a FOIA request on December 27th with the governor, with Secretary of Transportation, with the transit agency, with the mayor, and with this federal regional planning body. So we got responses back from the mayor, from WMAPCO, which is a regional planning body. We really didn't get a whole lot from those two. The Department of Transportation responded quickly, but they wanted $1,000, which we didn't have. So we figured, well, let's forget those guys. We'll just, keep bugging the governor. And that's what we really want to see. What, in fact, did he order and when did he order it? So we filed that request December 27th. We got 135 emails 6 months later. That's like, one email a day we got.
You needed Lisa. She could have cut through that for you.
We have something similar to, we have the Attorney General's office in theory. After 3 months, I said, look, this is ridiculous. I'm filing a complaint with the Attorney General's office. And so they contacted me, they contacted the governor's office. The Attorney General's office said, no, they're not taking excessive time. 6 months, they agreed to do that. So we got 450 emails, but only 135 real emails because they dumped this stuff on us, and most of the emails were duplicates. Some emails we got 10 and 15 times. So I created a database to try to separate this stuff, and I was able to sort it by date, by origin, by destination, and whatever. And sure enough, these emails, the emails that we got talk about this grand bargain, about getting the buses off of Rodney Square. And what really got me about the emails was how the governor of this state, of my state, allowed these private business people to call public officials and tell them what to do. I was amazed by that. The Bank of America, which is catty corner from this square, was contacting the head of the bus company. One of the cameras is going to be installed. It's taking too long. You're not backing off. I mean, it was absurd. They should not have that kind of relationship that he allowed. And public officials should report to public officials. They shouldn't be reporting to Buccini Pollen, which is a major developer in downtown Wilmington, who renovated this headquarters. So we got 135 original emails, but we got 100 pages of redactions. We got 100 pages, nothing but black ink. I mean, the governor triggered executive privilege for these redacted emails. And I said, what in God's name do you have to have executive privilege for a bus stop and a bus sign and moving people around downtown Wilmington? Well, God knows what was in those emails. We haven't found out. We haven't given up, but we're still going to try to pursue that. We tried to go to the Federal Transit Administration up in Philadelphia. When it hit the press, they canceled the meeting. So I filed a FOIA request with them, and it was not really what I was looking for. So we've met a lot of roadblocks with this. Cleaning up a refinery, we got a lot of play. When we talk about mass transit, essentially is the stepchild of the environmental movement. I thought we'd get a lot more support from some of the environmental groups, and we haven't done that. But we formed our own group called the Coalition to Restore Bus Service in Rodney Square. We got about 2,500 signatures. We're continuing that petition drive. We're thinking about legal challenges. But it has been frustrating because the people that use buses, their lives are so inconvenienced by this. And, when I take a bus downtown, I got to get off 6 blocks from the library if I'm going to the library. But it's absurd. So there's about 300 or 400 buses that stop on one side of the square, but those same buses don't stop there on the way in. They stop every time Dick and Harry play. So we're losing bus stops at the insistence of Uccini Pollen. You can't get bus stops at intersecting bus lines. You got to go 2 blocks past or get off 2 blocks forward. And, it really has got my goat that our governor has allowed our transit schedules and our routes and our bus stops to be taken over by private interests, and it really just ticks me off.
Thank you. In an effort, I had a couple other questions, but I'd like to open it up to you guys since you were kind enough to come this morning and fire away. Yes.
Good morning, Ms. Thompson. Thank you so much for all of you to be here. I had a question in regards to one of the comments around copying. Being the younger generation, we have our cell phone. Are there limitations around that? Have you had apprehensions around, rather than just going to do a formal copy, just snapping a pic with your phone? Has that been, what are your experiences?
I snap with whatever I have available, and the phone is perfect, right? I don't know if they're legal. I don't worry about that.
Okay.
I don't, until somebody comes in, like I was over in DC, and it wasn't like, I was actually physically copying some records once in DC government, and this woman came up to me. She didn't know who I was, but the FOIA person, I got lucky because he really didn't want to be bothered with me. He says, why don't you just come down and make your own copies? When somebody tells you that, you go right then, you go down there, and so I'm copying away, and this woman comes up and she says, I don't know if you should be copying that. I'm like, oh, okay. Copy, right? Copy the stuff. Had the FOIA officer actually take the boxes to my car and I got out of there. So, you copy it however you can. So if you've got a phone, it's way cheaper, right? As long as you can read the document and you have some proof that, that's where you got it from a specific agency. But I don't, Lisa would know better than I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. But I say do what you need to do, as long as it seems legal, until somebody tells you can't. Yeah.
Can I talk about phones in answer to that just a sec? Phones are great for recording things too. So you do want to be careful about what your state law says, about whether you are a one-party consent state or two-party consent state, or just go ahead and do whatever you want.
But is that recording conversations or recording documents? The one-party, two-party
That's
consent?
recording audio conversations
Okay.
or video.
Okay.
But if you're standing on the sidewalk, you take a picture, someone comes up, says you can't take a picture of that building. If you're in a public space, give the Reporters Committee a call, we'll help you out and keep that photo.
We have ongoing disputes in Delaware about whether you can legally take pictures or film. I mean, that's absurd. We had an issue with the Family Law Commission. They kicked this guy out because he was taking pictures. Newcastle County Board of Adjustment kicked out a radio station because they were doing some live video. I mean, these guys wing it. I mean, they think they're on the Supreme Court or something like that. Now, on the redacted documents we got 100 pages of blacked out documents. We filed a complaint with the Attorney General's office, and we asked the Attorney General on the 4th floor of the State Building, will you go up to the 12th floor and take an iPhone and see whether, in fact, the executive privilege exists here, or whether they're just blowing smoke. And the Attorney General, the Chief Deputy Attorney General, a guy named Aaron Goldstein, would not go from the 4th floor to the 12th floor. He said we had to go to court to get what's called an in-camera review of these documents. But I know for a fact that the Attorney General has issued 30 opinions over the last 10 years where they did have what's called in-camera review of these disputed documents. So I was really disappointed. The enforcement of these laws depends on who's there, and if you get somebody who's really strong, you're golden. But a lot of people, you know, I hate to think it, but we have an attorney general who's leaving, and some of those attorneys would like to go work for the governor, for the state, and they're not going to be too demanding of these officials.
And I also say, don't leave without what you came for. Don't leave without what you know, because it's not the government's job to help us. No offense, Lisa. It's not when it comes to public records. Their job is not to say, here you go, you know, write that really bad story about us. We love you anyway. That's not their job. Their job is to, you know, sometimes people like Lisa get it, right? Because she's just one of those people who gets it. Not everybody gets it. And so sometimes you're dealing, like what John said, with people who don't know. They're all over the map in terms of what the law is. And so I just say, if you go there for specific records, I remember my colleague Ovita Wiggins and I were doing on the Jack Johnson stuff, and Ovita had called the county to ask for some records, and the woman told her it was financial disclosure forms of officials in the county, and she told Ovita to come the next day. So we go and we get there, and she tells Ovita, she says, "Oh, I'm sorry, you know, you can't have them." I told Ovita, I was like, "I got this." I said, "Listen, I told her to come." I said, "We're not leaving here until we get them." And we had to wait like 30 minutes, but she brought them. So stay there, you know, just dig in, be nice about it, right? Don't get in anybody's face, don't pull weapons, but stick to your guns and go after what you want. Yes, I know you.
As a former news
Yeah,
ombudsman, I can empathize with you and your job.
Used to be at the New York Times.
I think my students and I are going to try to do a FOIA or a Maryland request. Are there certain areas that you know you're going to have difficulty with in terms of requests, and are there some things easier than others?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, that would be,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, for Maryland.
I mean, there are things in the law called mandatory exemptions that are things that agencies are actually prohibited from releasing. They have no discretion. So, for example, you can't ask for the personnel records of public employees. You know, their job evaluations, you know, their health benefits elections.
Well, you can ask, you just won't get it.
You can ask for it, but you won't get it. You won't get it.
Sometimes you get lucky.
And I won't be able to help you either if you want those documents, because it's a mandatory exemption and the agency has no discretion. With some agencies, request for email is, it's not that they're exempt or anything, but they have a lot of difficulty. They're not processing these requests efficiently. And the reasons are various, but in many cases, they don't have they're not using appropriate technology to do the searches. They may not be using appropriate technology to do redactions. They may not be consulting with counsel as they should be on questions about exemptions. And they may not be communicating with you regularly about where things stand. So sometimes questions for requests for email, for text messaging, can be problematic, not because they're legally exempt per se, but just because it's an access issue. Social media posts are, you know, I mean, certainly they're subject, if a public official or a program maintains a social media account and they're using it for public purposes to transact, it's subject to the public records laws, but you could encounter resistance because agency personnel may not have dawned on them yet that they have an obligation to maintain these records in accordance with records laws and to produce them or make them available. You know, on a subject matter basis, there are issue areas that can get tricky. So, for example, Maryland receives money, grant money from the feds to surveil its citizens, to surveil critical infrastructure. Records relating to that kind of infrastructure are subject to federal FOIA exemptions, and Maryland will automatically assert that they cannot produce it without the blessings of the TSA and their subject matter experts. investigatory files of law enforcement agencies.
Unless the case is closed?
Unless the case has been closed for many years. Although you would be surprised, or maybe you would not be surprised, but there are instances where the investigatory exemption has been asserted for cases that are long closed.
Why?
Because of information about, in instances where the case was not solved, information about sources consulted, attempts to locate witnesses who were never found. Sometimes it's interjurisdictional. This jurisdiction has closed its file, but they believe the perpetrator was also active in another jurisdiction, and that jurisdiction has an open investigation. Sometimes it's a matter of they need to go back and take a second look at this and reevaluate whether there really is an active need today to maintain something in confidence. So I think it's always worthwhile to ask questions and have the agency explain why. And in Maryland, either you as a requester or the agency is entitled to come to my office for help in getting it resolved or worked out.
One thing, if I could just add real quick, one suggestion I make is think about police blotters. Go in, do any jurisdictional local police office, say, I want to see your blotter. What's going on in the last 24 hours? Sometimes they'll show it to you. It's right over there, right to your left. Enjoy. And that's great. And sometimes they'll say, why are you asking? And then you're onto something, and then your student's onto something. That's a little faster than dealing with some of the critical infrastructure where you're sitting and waiting and making phone calls if you want to exercise in something interesting.
And that's where sources come into play
Yeah.
too, because
Yeah.
with the story on the 6 little black girls who were murdered almost 50 years ago in DC, that would fall to the FBI and FBI records. And I thought, I'm not going to deal with the FBI and wait for years to get this. So I went around them to a few law enforcement sources I had, and both of them had every document that was created by the FBI. So I got it that way. So sometimes, check with sources, and particularly people who have something I've learned about detectives and cops and law enforcement people. They take their files with them when they leave. This person had boxes in their basement. It was like Christmas for me. I went over there, I was like, oh my God, everything. Autopsy photos, crime scene photos, investigative reports, from 50 years ago. So, sometimes there are other ways to get stuff rather than filing the FOIA, because it's clear that the law, and I will ask you guys this, I'll ask Rick this, is the law working as intended? And if it is not, what needs to be done?
It's not working as intended. That's a quick answer. It's easy, and a lot needs to be done. At the federal level, we've tried to get the agencies to just manage their requests better. So they come into one spot. You can check the status of your request by sort of, logging into that same data set. We can't even get them to create this sort of open FOIA portal. They're working on it now. Congress has mandated that they do it, but they're fighting over who's supposed to run it and how it's supposed to look and what's supposed to be included.
Congress fighting?
Yeah, and agencies too. Everybody wants their own turf. So the technology needs to be improved. The political leadership, not just at our elected level, but the agency heads need to spend more time on it. If the agency heads care about FOIA working better, they will put more resources to it. They will take staff to say, no, you really need to process that request. You need to manage it better. There are real challenges that they face. We've talked to them. We know that there are real challenges they face, but they can be overcome, and they should be overcome. It's complicated. It should be harder for legislatures to exempt information from disclosure. It's super easy to do it now. You go to a committee, you talk to a staff member and say, look, you did high-speed rail in this area, all right, we'll give you the proposal, but we don't want the public to find out what we're telling you. And so they slip it in, and then we find it, and we go say, no, you shouldn't have that exemption. We should all see that. And the staff member goes, oh, how did you even find that? It's too easy to do that. It's got to be harder. So that's something that we care about because we fight these things.
So who writes the FOIAs, and when was the last time the laws were revised? It feels so antiquated.
So this is one thing I wanted to mention, especially given this political environment and especially given now the threats, the real, I think, threats against journalists, and we all have to be very careful, and you all have to be very careful about being safe, and your newsrooms have to be careful about being safe. You know, during the McCarthy era, that led one congressman named John Moss to work very hard for Congress, for the federal government to be more open, and that led to the passage of the Federal Freedom of Information Act in 1966. It took a very long time for that to happen. Every 10 years, Congress finds its way to revising it, to making it work better, about every 10 years. It was last done in 2016. You know, electronic records are supposed to be available electronically if you request them. That happened long before we all were walking around with cell phones, because people were thinking about it and pushing. So part of our effort here, doing the job you're doing and getting those records, is to think about over the long term, how can it work better, and what can you do working through your press association, through your schools, to make sure the elected leaders think about that and do reinvest in press freedom, do reinvest in openness. So a lot has to be done. We need a shield law to protect sources so the journalists don't go to jail if they say, no, I'm not going to tell you who my source was. You know, the police department, like in Chicago. Have you ever heard of Laquan McDonald, 17-year-old kid who was shot and killed?
So.
All right.
Yeah.
So that's a huge deal. You know, how did justice happen in that case? Through journalism, right? The police department said, oh, he was lunging at us. We shot him, we killed him. It was self-defense. The reality was, there was a witness who talked to a reporter and said, no, there's a video. He was running away.
This was an independent journalist too. It was somebody who didn't
Yes,
work.
Jamie Calvin.
Yep.
10 years earlier,
Yep.
the police went after his to try to get him to reveal his source. He knew the deal. He knew what was going to happen. They found that the autopsy records that showed that he was shot 16 times. That was the story. They found a video of the shooting. So the police officer was brought up on murder charges, and he was just convicted second-degree murder a couple weeks ago. The judge throughout the case was worried about, you know, making sure there was justice and the right court process. He threatened to put reporters in jail. He wanted all of the filings to be done secretly to him, and that he would send them to the clerk's office. You know, my colleagues spent a lot of time on that case. And all throughout the process, you have to fight for openness, and you have to fight to get the records you want to get.
Yeah.
That's why press freedom is important. Let's think long-term. That's my spiel. Sorry.
The power of the press is real.
Yeah, it's real.
It's real.
It's
yeah.
real.
Well, 2 more questions, and then I think you have to go. Okay. Yes, sir.
Actually, I had 2 questions, but it was related to
We'll let you have
the
2.
cost. One was for you and one was for Lisa. So you said the compliance board in Maryland can take cases up to $350 or more for fees, but their rulings are, they can rule, and they're enforceable in court. I thought they were just opinions and not enforceable. They are?
They are binding.
They're
The
binding.
rulings of the PIA Compliance Board, which are limited to fee dispute issues of a certain amount, are binding on the parties. And what I mean about when I say binding are that if you don't get voluntary compliance with the opinion, you can go to court and get an order from a judge.
For that amount.
Yeah, and and if you don't obey a court order, there's something called contempt of court, and then there are things called the bailiff, the sheriff. Judges have that power, but they are binding and enforceable. So yes, and it's any fee dispute that is $350 or over. If you think that you've been charged a fee that does not comport with the law, maybe they might be charging you for things they're not allowed to charge you for. It may be an unreasonable fee. You can file a complaint with that board, and that will trigger their process.
Well, then, and that's getting with you, because sometimes it's not just the research they have to do. Maybe they don't have the technology, but they're charging an outrageous amount for copies. And you said the Post has a portable copier?
Well, we did then. I don't know whether we
I
do.
mean, do you think that's a good idea now, to just take your copier someplace and? 'Cause
Well-
I thought
Or
about
scan
doing
it.
that.
It was
And I
kind of,
said,
it kind of left the agency speechless. You walk in and you got a portable copy, what are they gonna say? No, you
You
can't?
could make your money back from Office Max or whatever in a couple trips. I mean,
No,
some
no,
of these
I'm talking
fees are-
thousands of
Oh,
dollars.
that's what I'm talking about too. And
They were charging, and they didn't, we don't mind, I don't know of any news agency, maybe I'm wrong, that minds paying for reasonable, the law says reasonable
Right.
copying fees. $3,000 for a contract log or whatever it was is not a reasonable copying fee. And so, you know, you take your phone now, you make your own copies if that works for you. So,
You can always call us, the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. Give us a call. We have folks who will, and you can say, look, is $500 for this reasonable? Is $15,000 for this data set reasonable? Probably not. You know, and we can help. And
Yeah.
sometimes a letter from us helps.
sometimes, yeah, oh yeah, you guys carry, no, you carry cloud, and I would get upset with, not upset, but frustrated is probably a better word, when they say, well, you know, it's gonna be, because I say, break the fees down for me. You know, what are you charging for? And they say, well, $40 an hour for staff time to do this, and I'm like, and it's gonna be $15. I'm like, does that staff member make $40 an hour? And the answer is no. So, you know, it's just sort of this, you go round and round, and, you know, ultimately you have to decide what's important to
You know, Cheryl, I
journalism.
think hopefully technology will solve a lot of these problems. The more documents that we can get on the internet, the better it's going to be and cheaper it's going to be. If you're doing historical research, I've been on the FBI website and I have found some fascinating reports on there. I had a friend of mine who was a detective in the New York City Police Department. He was an undercover detective for an organization called BOSSI, Bureau of Special Services Investigation. And one of his targets was a man by the name of Malcolm X. He tapped Malcolm X's phone for about a year. Malcolm X was assassinated in, I think, February of 65, and he was there 63 and 64. He's still living in Delaware today. But I went on the FBI website and was kind of curious about what do they have on Malcolm X. They got 50,000 pages on Malcolm X in there. And I downloaded most of them. And that man, no matter where he went, there was an FBI informant to meet him. He couldn't go anywhere in this country. It's absolutely incredible how extensive. We had this FBI from 56 to 72 domestic spying operation, and Malcolm X is certainly, you know, one of them that was extensively investigated. But there was one humorous thing I found. There was a hit song in 1963 called Louie Louie by the Kingsmen. And there was an uproar about all these mothers and fathers who didn't like this song. They said it was obscene and indecent. But nobody knew what the words were in this song. So the people in Florida, they complained to Hoover, you know, they said, this is what the song's saying. And
J.
text
Edgar, former,
J. Edgar Hoover.
former FBI director.
From 1922 to 72. So everybody had different ideas about what were the words to the song Louie Louie, which was not the theme song, but in the movie Animal House. And finally, after a 2-year investigation and extensive reports, they brought the record in, they played it in the FBI laboratory. They said, we have no idea what they're saying on this record, you know.
And it became their theme song, no?
Yeah, right.
Well, the final question goes to the young man in the striped shirt.
Not every story deals with federal agencies and state agencies. A lot of times they deal with small local governments, and you're just dealing with people who don't really know the law as well as other agencies. So I'm just curious what your take is on that and what we should possibly do, or if you can do anything, or you just deal with it.
I work with a lot of municipalities and, you know, small towns in Maryland. Even at the county level, sometimes you find a great deal of variation in knowledge and sophistication and resources. You know, every contact, every request is an opportunity to educate or to suggest a better way to do something or to point out resources that are available. I think you know, since I've been in office now a couple of years, I think people I have contact with know that I'm not a police. You know, I'm not a roving grand jury looking to indict them. I'm looking to help make the law work better. So I try to take advantage of opportunities to make suggestions to office, to programs, to officials. And in fact, what I have found is that in many of those smaller principalities, they don't have in-house counsel. They've got some outside law firm they're paying. So every time they have to ask a legal question, you know, they're going to get a bill. And their budget may not allow for that. So I have found that very often these smaller offices and towns are very grateful to have, an outside neutral come in and say, I'm not your lawyer, I can't give you legal advice, but here's my take on it, or this is the way I would approach this, or this is what I'm finding other agencies are doing. So yes, certainly the problems run the gamut, and there are a lot of smaller offices that need a lot of help.
Okay.
In Delaware, these small towns, they look on FOIA as a impediment, a hindrance, and they don't like to give you timely responses in Delaware. So the smaller the town, the more difficult it is. That's been my experience. In the city of Wilmington, where Christina used to work with, very, very bureaucratic. That has been my experience. Charging me fees, where's this coming from, So.
Thank you, guys. I'd like to thank my panelists. Thank you guys for sharing your knowledge. Thank you guys for coming out and enjoying the rest of the program.